That's why I have to do it now, it's taking a minute. Well, that's here, I mean, Zach's here, so. Hold on.
I'm trying not to kick the boards.
I'm showing 7 on my clock, so Katrina, are we online?
You're online.
Then I will call the meeting to order. We normally don't see interpretations. This crowd is about the same size we had last time we had interpretation. So I'm going to lean on our legal counsel if I get off track or anything, by all means, bring me in. That being said, that. All right, then if you always would give us a summary of what you're requesting, and I'm sure we'll have questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Silvestri. I'm an attorney at Carter Seekers to Memory. And I'm here with my colleague, Alicia Staplosa. And also we represent Margaret Fiore in this application for an interpretation of the zoning code related to that section of the code that deals with tourist homes and bed and breakfasts. And in specifically, we're looking for the reversal of the code enforcement officer's determination that the property is not owner occupied as Ms. Fiore's primary residence. And how that issue came up is that Ms. Fiore made an application just recently, May 25th, 2022, made application for a special use permit for a bed and breakfast tourist home operation at her residence at 383 Conroe. That application was denied on June 10th by the code enforcement officer. And the reasoning given was that it was not owner occupied as the owner's primary residence. There was unfortunately no rationale as to why he came to that conclusion. And in a minute, I'll talk about some of the reasons why it is in fact her primary residence. I do want to just quickly mention though, because I know that this property has generated some interest in the past and currently. What this is not about tonight is not about any application trying to conduct some type of special events such as weddings. It's also not about going through the criteria for special use permit. If we are successful in our discussion tonight, then we can submit an application. That, of course, would be the job of the planning board to go through the criteria. Again, tonight, the focus should be on the interpretation of the code and whether or not Ms. Fiore meets the requirements of the owner occupancy as primary residence. So on that point, the code provides no definition of owner occupied or primary residence, nor does it set forth any kind of criteria that be relevant in that kind of discussion. So where there's ambiguity in the zoning code, the New York law basically requires that ambiguity be interpreted in favor of the property owner. So we respectfully request that you keep that in mind when you're making, considering the decision to make here tonight.
Does lack of the definition automatically equate to ambiguity?
And it's a big factor in whether or not there's ambiguity.
But it doesn't
It doesn't automatically. And later on, I'm going to talk about how one of the key terms is defined and one of the key terms is not defined. So the code does not require that the property owner has to reside on the property in order to have a tourist home or bed and breakfast. It doesn't require that certain number of days have to be rented or minimum number of days have to be rented. It also doesn't require that the owner has to reside on the premises when the premises is rented. Those are all factors we believe also that are relevant in this consideration. Now, for Ms. Fiore, she bought the property with her husband, and they own it jointly, on October 2020 to use as a personal residence and to use as a tourist home. She spends about a third of the calendar year at the property. And as I mentioned, her husband and she own the property jointly. The May 2020 special use permit application also indicated that it is her permanent residence and included a copy of her driver's license, which shows this property as her residence. She has voter registration at this residence, and in fact, voted in the November 2020 town supervisor election. She has immediate family, a large number of immediate family in the Rochester area. When she comes to visit that family, she resides at the residence on Pond Road. She is also in the process of restoring the property to a working farm once again, with a focus on apple orchards. Now, there may be some other farming type crops and so forth, but the main focus is going to be on apple orchards. And toward that end, she's basically employed on working toward that restoration of the farm. And she also employs a property caretaker and a property manager to assist her in that endeavor. Now, getting into a little more detail about the code itself, the town code defines bed and breakfast, but it doesn't define tourist home. Bed and breakfast is defined by the code as a single family dwelling in which sleeping rooms integral with the residence quarters are rented to transient guests and service includes meals. So that's how a bed and breakfast is defined in the town code. Tourist home, however, in that section of the code or anywhere else in the code is undefined. And when you have a term that's defined, and you have two terms both being used in the same code, the method of interpretation is you need to assume, to avoid redundancy, that the other term must mean something else. So tourist home doesn't just simply mean bed and breakfast, it must mean something else, but yet the code doesn't define what tourist home means. So what do you do that in that instance? You look at common definitions of what tourist home should mean. If you look at the Merriam-Webster definition of tourist home, it's simply a house in which rooms are available for rent for transients, or in other words, people looking to rent short term. There is nothing in that definition that requires an operator has to reside on the premises full time, or frankly, even at all. Not that is in our situation, as I mentioned, this is her primary residence, and she does reside there for about a third of the year. But again, for a tourist home, there's no requirement of any residency whatsoever.
Can you explain how it's the primary residence? And how is it the primary residence? She lives there for 130 years.
Well,
That's what makes it her primary residence.
because that is, they own several different properties, and they reside at those various properties at certain amounts of time during the year. 1/3 of the year is the amount of time she's spending there, and that's a significant amount of time as compared to the other properties that they own.
So that's more on
And-
this house less than any of the properties.
This year, in January of 2022, of all the properties that they own, it's the most amount of time split with the Florida residents that they have. If you follow that.
Tax, right?
I can confirm it through, confirm it through Ms. Fiore.
Well, you can't take a position in opposition to a tax return, so presumably the tax return would be the gold standard.
But, yeah, so for her taxes, but do you file jointly? And her husband is resident of Florida for purposes of taxes. But if you look at the criteria under the tax code for what constitutes a permanent residence, she meets the criteria for this to be her permanent residence. So the criteria includes place of employment, and again, her current employment right now is restoration of this farm. Her principal home of family members, a vast majority of her family members reside in the Rochester area. The address is listed on a driver's license. As I mentioned, her driver's license has this address as her residence. Voter registration is another factor of the tax code. As I mentioned, she's registered to vote here and no other place. And then mailing address. Well, the utility bills are being mailed to her home here in Mendon. So if you even look at tax code factors,
There's one part of the tax code factors left out, and that is that the IRS says the most important factor is where you spend the most time, right? And part of it says a balancing test is used, but
So-
the IRS publication says the most time is the most important factor.
right, and so if you go by most time, at the moment, she would say, I can have her say directly, it's split 50-50.
You don't have to tell us, because our job, again, as you pointed out, is not whether to issue a special use permit, it's how to interpret the code.
That's right.
So we're just talking about what primary residence means. And it seems like your position is that it's very similar to the IRS principal residence. Is that right?
It is, yeah. Their time is split. In terms of most, she would say, and she's here to say, if you need her to verify this, her time is in January 2022 through now, her time has been most, it's about 50-50 between here and Florida.
50-50 or 30-1-30.
I'm sorry, who are you?
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure how this process works. Should I just
So
say?
it's been all wrong, people, yeah, we'll be back and forth, we'll be a time later where anyone here can come up to say something.
Thank you.
And again, it's important to understand how that term primary residence should be interpreted in the context of the zoning code that we're talking about.
The code that doesn't allow for temporary housing, which would be codifying that situation.
Your code allows for a tourist home to be a special use permit.
But we don't allow for temporary housing. Which is
Exactly,
tourist.
again, that's not. There is a method to be able to run a tourist home in this town through a special use permit. That is what she's trying to do and being prevented from doing so because somebody has made a determination, the code enforcement officer made a determination, it's not a primary residence. We're here today to challenge whether or not it is in fact a primary
And
residence.
so part of what you're asking for is for us to say that the code enforcement officer should not have prevented the application.
That's correct, and allow the application to now be heard before the planning.
There's two aspects to what you're asking. You're asking us to reverse the code enforcement officer's determination that prevented it from going to the planning board. You're also asking us to interpret the code regarding private residence or owner occupied such that.
Ultimately, we're asking for you to direct the code enforcement officer to allow the application to go to the planning board to be heard for the special use permit. To do so, I believe you need to make an interpretation on what constitutes primary residence for purposes of at least that section of town code dealing with special use permits for bed and breakfast / tourist operations. So that's all we have for our presentation and willing to take any questions.
I don't mean, you don't really answer that question, but have you been presenting this, but have you been people coming to stay at the place already, or is that not happening?
At this time, it is, the rental property aspect of this has been blocked out for the balance of the rest of this year. She has had family members there. She has some friends there. And they did put the property up for charity and charity with no money going to them. And there's going to be 3 instances of families coming to stay at the house. Again, all this was through a charity situation. With no money being transferred, no money going.
If you follow the Instagram of Chateau de Longchamp, you continuously posting that you're taking reservations.
If you were to go on, you would see it blocked off at the end of the year.
But you had been advertising that up until
Yes.
3 weeks ago.
It is still being advertised, but we are completely black, so if you were to go on, you would attempt to black something, you can't get on. Complete, it shows that it's completely blacked off, so when I'm there, it's blacked off, you can't look here.
But the intent for the last year has been to reserve bookings.
They are no longer reserving bookings.
And you've also hosted events in that time being.
Any
So-
events have been hosted on my personal events. I had my class meeting there, I had my family picnic there, we had other parties here with my family. I am one of 7, there are 32 grandchildren and 25 great-grandchildren. The oldest great-grandchild is 20, gonna be 21 years old. I have a very large family.
That's okay. I'm
So
not-
and I'm letting you know, so I have a lot of people that go to the house. I let my nieces and nephews, especially this past week, go use my pool because they freeze up, they have no pool. So I do allow them to go there
You hosted a wedding September 11th.
With a permit.
with a permit, yes.
According to the Department of Health, you did not follow through with the proper certification as far as the well and water source.
They had potable water, they brought in their own water.
And at this time,
Yes, no one's brought in their own water, they did not use any of our water.
at this time, the septic system has been upgraded and approved by the county. And I don't know, if that's the situation.
The water, our water is, in our house, is drinkable water. When we purchased the home, we ran a battery test and our water is safe to drink. We have, a purification system.
This
But
was-
when I had Nolan's come in, we strictly told them, no, you cannot use our water. You have to bring your own potable water. And your own water.
We have a record of the septic system within the township now. Yeah, they did one.
Yes,
Katrina, can you confirm for you? That?
Yes, she did submit information that they have redone septic and I believe leach lines. Am I correct on that one? You just redid the septic or
yeah,
added
we
more
do
lines?
septic, add more lines, yeah.
How recently was this filed? Because Corey.
We were waiting for the weather. if I
We're
remember
waiting for
correctly.
the weather to break because so
So this was like 2 weeks ago?
no, it was
April.
Yeah, it was a couple months ago.
March or April, they came in and then they did beginning first week of April, they put in a whole new system.
And we have the paperwork, we can submit that if we need that, so that
The township does not.
Well, they do have.
Yeah, we have, I have it with their other
We have
application.
Paperwork, it looks like approved by the Department of Public Health,
Okay.
so. Which is not the law of Iowa, but also. So I heard you say a third of the time here and half, so could you clarify that a little bit?
They own a number of different properties. And if you take all the properties together, and if you consider since October of, say, 2020, when they purchased the property, it's about a third of the time. Now, if you look at the 2 properties they use the most, it's this property and it's the Florida property. And if you're looking at just those 2, I asked Ms. Fiore, which property you spend the most time at? And she said, well, it's really split between this property and Florida.
So she would define the Florida home as domicile.
How do you define a domicile? Domicile is not a definition. She defines this property as her primary residence, active, and goes through all the processes for this to be your primary residence: driver's license, voter registration.
Buying gas and shopping at the grocery store.
And
Anything else?
right, plus employing people in this area for,
But we don't have to decide what it means primary. We have to decide what primary residence means, and it sounds like you think it means something similar to your general life services.
And we're also asking that you make a decision, this is a factor of primary residence based on whatever definition they decide is going to be appropriate.
Reading up the code, I can actually look at it, but I think special use permit says that that distinction of deciding falls to the planning board as they decide the various ways of the 8 qualifications for this particular special use permit. So we could decide how to interpret that, but I believe it goes to them, jump in and tell me wrong, to actually make the decision, yes or no, if this is the primary residence.
Yeah, I think if you proceed with your application for a special use permit, we tell the planning board to accept it. You have to prove to the planning.
That
As
may be,
defined by us.
but that may be true as part of the criteria for the special use permit, but again, we can't even get in front of the planning board.
Paul, can you describe for the board a little bit more detail of whether it's 50% or 30% of your clients' duration of stays? I mean, are you flying back to Florida every weekend or once a week or what? Just give us a better picture of your clients' stays.
So I basically feel like right now I'm being persecuted in the sense that my husband did very well financially. We own 5 homes. I own 1 in Florida, where my husband's a permanent resident. I own 2 homes in Canada that I usually spend, but we have not been able to get there because of COVID. I usually spend some time in May, part of June, all of July, all of August, maybe a long weekend in September, and maybe some time in October. I still have my home in Pittsville because my 2 daughters live there. But most of my time is spent in Florida and up here. I have been up here the past 2.5 weeks, taking care of my mother, who's bedridden. So I am a primary resident up here, and I feel like, how am I supposed to prove where my residency is if I own 5 homes? And so I feel like I'm being punished because we did well. A lot of people, not a lot, some people own more than 1 home. I choose this to be my primary residence because this is where majority of my family is.
I don't think it's a punishment to have to prove that you're complying with the law.
What more do I have to do than put in my taxes and my driver's license? I have no bills anymore that come to me anywhere. All of my bills come online. So I can be anywhere in the world and pay my bills.
Where's your primary bank?
I don't have a primary bank. Or I have a bank in Canadian National Bank up here. But all the other accounts are in my husband's name. And they are in Florida.
You mean Canada National Bank?
Yeah, what did I say?
Canada.
Sorry, I can't say the National Bank. I'm sorry.
Can you run through those months again? If you said that you spent up here, one might be pretty fast. I think.
Here, well, so let me just backtrack for you guys. We bought the property in October 2020. We spent most of October, early November here, a little bit of December. On December 30th, my husband got sick, transfers myelitis, became paralyzed from the waist down, and I had to go to Long Island where he was. He then had to be rehabbed, and we shipped him, we flew him down to Florida, where I had to spend 6 months with him in Florida. And then I was up here May, June of last year, most of September, October, up here, and then I've been back and forth with him. It's a new calendar year, he's healthier now, Canada's open, and I'm being asked to recount my entire year. I never thought I had to keep a calendar of where I am and when I am. I never thought I had to do that. So here it is, I get a letter in June, where have you been? I drive or I fly. I don't crack, because I have freedom to come and go as I please anywhere in this world. So I don't keep track of it. It's that simple. I try to recount the best I can to where I was on what date. I have to spend a lot of time doing that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know that you just stated that you've been up here the last few weeks, apart from the last few weeks now. From January.
I was in January here. I spent time here in January. We had a family gathering at my house. I don't know if I was here 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But I know I went back to Florida at least once in January to see my husband.
So apart from that, can you tell us how much time you spent up here, besides that in the last 2 weeks?
Because I spend a minimum of once a week up here, a minimum. Sometimes I'm up here 2 weeks. I just don't keep track of it, I apologize, I just don't.
You said once a week, how?
Well, I'm sorry, 1 week out of a month, I'm sorry, I misspoke. 1 week out of a month, I'm up here.
1 week straight.
Yeah, sometimes more. So 1 week I might be up here for 5 days, and the next month I might be up here for 2 weeks. But on average, 1 full week, a month, sometimes more.
And then the bulk of the rest of the time before the.
It could be Florida, I mean, right now Canada's open, I've gone to Canada. I might go down to Long Island and see my children. I haven't been to Long Island in, I don't know, maybe 2 months.
I'll just emphasize too, again, she has a caretaker and a property manager that works with her in this property. So if there is any rentals that would go on, if there ever comes a time for her to be allowed to rent property through Airbnb, Vrbo, whatever whatever tourist home, whatever opportunities there are, even if she were not present at the same time that somebody might, a renter may be present, she's got a property manager and a caretaker to oversee.
But the town board amended the code specifically to remove presence of the operator and require the owner. So it seems like that doesn't matter. Seems like.
So then I would ask them, why in the code are you being so restricted to require owner occupied primary residence?
That's the way that the New York State Department of Taxation defines it. If you're owner occupied, it's a B&B, which is a hotel, and that's how it's taxed. If it's a tourist home, it's not taxed.
Yes, it is. We're taxed, we pay hotel tax. On all, any time anybody stayed in, we pay hotel tax.
Prorated.
Pardon?
It's a prorated fee.
What do you mean?
So
I
it's-
think that might fall outside of, your question was why does the zoning code?
Yeah, why the zoning code.
And then because the town board decided that's what they want to use.
And one would think, because they want to make sure the owner is overseeing the tenancy, right? And my point is just, she may not be here all the time, but she's got not just one other person, but 2 other people that can assist and oversee if somebody's noisy, if somebody's throwing garbage or not acting appropriately.
driving UTVs up and down the road, and there's music playing at 3 o'clock.
I think there's a higher level of accountability on owners of the presence of property. That would be my guess.
That may not also have regular hours present at that facility. They may have 50 different facilities that they have to balance their time, so you use 10 minutes a week. A month. We don't have a definition of that time.
The property manager and caretaker, do they live on the property full time?
No, they do not. The caretaker is the fire chief on Conway Falls. He is there almost every day. We have a working farm going on, we're working on restoring the farm, so he is there working during the day, along with a couple other men that he may hire.
Any other questions? All right. Well, with that, we'll come back and forth with you. I'm pretty comfortable with this public comment. Before I do that, I see a lot of you there. I just have a show of hands who would like to say something, just so I have a sense of how it's going to be. All right. Please, all right. The minimum been asked that when you take your turn, if you could state your name so that our minute keeper can keep track of who's saying what. And say whatever you want to say, and if someone has essentially said the same thing, then I'll mean just simplify and, you know, what you could say. I'm going to say that you would like to speak. We'll just come to the video first. Yeah, you know, okay, yeah. So who would like to go first?
So may I just ask too, do they need to identify their address?
Yes, I need their name and address, and then you can only address the board. Okay, and you can't address the QRAs or their attorneys, and the board can only address you. Does that make sense? They might have a chance to respond, but you can't go back and forth. That's the only thing.
On conversation with the audience.
Okay.
So,
Hi, I'm Ron Zowski, I live at 20 Stony Ridge Drive. 20 Stony Ridge Drive is a road that cul-de-sacs the Pond Road. So for me to leave my house, I must drive on Pond Road, whether I'm walking, biking, or driving a car. I can go left or right. It's a 50-50 proposition. I can honestly tell you that I walk past this house probably every day of the year. Whether I'm walking my dog, riding my bike, driving back and forth. I'm assuming the woman sitting at the middle table here is Mrs. Jordan. I can honestly tell you, I've never seen that woman in my entire life. I walk dogs past there, I ride my bike past there, never seen that woman in my life. So if it is her primary residence, and she's a farmer or a restoring person, I've actually never seen her outside.
nice.
We are recently.
Name,
Okay, so
address.
name and address, please.
Pooler, 373 Pond Road.
373. Thank you.
So right next door, just bought the lot next door, we certainly wouldn't have purchased the lot next door if we had known. So we're looking at the reviews on Airbnb, and are you there? Well, okay, so I'm wondering if they're there when, I'm looking at all the reviews, and at least every month, there's a couple every month where there's company gatherings, family reunions. We're looking at least 10 to 15 people gathering at once. And certainly that's not something that we feel comfortable with in the neighborhood. So are you, I'm just wondering, are they there? This is their primary residence, which my understanding is their primary residence.
And our contention is
Denny
Denny,
Brewer.
373 Pond Road.
Gotcha, thank you.
So if you look at the reviews on Airbnb, they state specific. And if you look at Airbnb, say for example, you want to
It's booked out.
rent it, it is literally booked out every week.
So Denny Brewer, in construction development, not against any of that stuff. We purchased that property to build a house in a rural area. It's not like we bought a place outside Henrietta where we know there's going to be development. We're opposed to any type of events, Airbnb. It is what it is. If that's still going on, or I'm not sure if that's allowed or what exactly it is, but to have events and weddings there every weekend, we're definitely against it.
Right, so we were under the understanding that maybe a family could rent it, a small family, say anywhere between 2 to 6 people could rent it on a weekend. But as we look through Airbnb, we're looking at company gatherings, like I said, family reunions, so it's becoming a much larger entity. And that's something that's,
We're against.
which is ironic because when we were looking at the lot a year ago, somebody had purchased it and we felt like we missed out on the purchase. And then all of a sudden we just kept getting the listings, and whoever did purchase it sold it immediately. We contacted them, this is the reason why, but we were under the impression that,
It's just a rural area.
right, and this was right.
Thank you.
James Buckholz, 972 Pittsburgh Minden Center Road, which is right around the corner from Pond Road. I've lived there for 45 years. When I bought the property, it was zoned farming, agriculture. I had to buy, we had horses, so we had to buy a certain minimum. You then changed the law. I think the zoning is now near the park, you have to have 5 acres minimum to build a house. So I don't know what I don't know that this property, what it's zoned for. If it's zoned for commercial, I have no problem. If it's zoned for residential, it's against the law.
So we've been going there regularly too, because we're starting to do some site work. So in terms of, I didn't see the dates, I didn't know the dates, we walked through a little late where the owner is there. We certainly haven't seen the owner at any time.
My name is Webb Pilcher. My wife Allison is right in front of me. We lived at 495 Pond Road for over 18 years. We're now building a retirement home right next door at 461 Pond Road. And you know, we moved to Pond Road to get away from the commercial landscape of where we lived before, you know, in Pittsburgh, and to enjoy the sunsets and the rural qualities of Pond Road. In fact, we moved to Pond Road precisely for a reason that I experienced a few weeks ago when I was walking by 383 Pond Road, and I'm walking by 383 Pond Road. There are probably 10 cars parked there, maybe 12 or so young men walking around the front yard with right next to the street without their shirts on, drinking beer, behaving reasonably with beautiful tattoos. And I've got nothing against tattoos, young men or beer, I like them all. But it was clearly a commercial event. And one of my colleagues who I work with rented that facility with all of his family probably 2 months ago. And he didn't meet the Fioris, and he stayed there. He thought it was a very nice house. He enjoyed it. So you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I do understand there's commercial zoning and residential zoning, and it seems like we're blurring that a little bit here, at least philosophically and practically. Furthermore, you know, the speed limit on Pond Road is 55 miles an hour. You know, you walk there all the time, ride your bike. You know, I walk on Pond Road. A lot of people jog on Pond Road. Those of us who live there understand that people do use Pond Road for that purpose, and we drive more slowly. People don't live here. We're coming for a getaway weekend, and are driving on Pond Road. They're going to go 55 miles an hour, and somebody's going to get hurt. So it's you know, I think we've reached a point where this is not a scenario where you have someone living in the house who's there when people rent it, who kind of watches out for them, and you're physically present when people are renting a room in your house. This has become something different as far as I can tell. And what was said earlier, it was implied that there was no rental over the past few months. But one of my good friends rented it. So I think, you know, we sort of need to understand what's really going on.
And to that point, we just rented an Airbnb on Monday, Tuesday in Ohio, with our son for college orientation. And same scenario, the owner did meet us and give us the key. So, and to this point, when you look again at the reviews, it's rented consistently every weekend.
Yes, good evening. My name is Dave Remley, and my wife Cynthia Remley. We reside at 437 Pond Road, a neighbor of Webb's, and I echo Webb's thoughts. On several occasions, we've been at this residence for close to 11 years now, I mean September. Although I've lived in the town within Mendon, Pittsburgh town line for over 50 years, I can gratefully say that. But having said that, I remember with the horses and carriages that we used to travel down the pastoral setting of Pond Road, and there'd be very little traffic. But yes, I will agree with Webb, the speed limit has increased, or shall I say the speed of vehicles have increased drastically over the last 3 years, and more so the last 6 to 8 months. I don't know if it's connected to the bed and breakfast. However, don't mean to digress here, but there have been several occasions this past summer, starting in spring, we sleep with our windows open because we have horses. And
You know, if I hear a horse going down or something, I like to get out there quick and hear, but the fact is, we get a prevailing westerly wind. I have heard on several occasions past 1 o'clock in the morning, up to 2 o'clock in the morning, of celebrations taking place up at that residence. So it's, and it goes on into the wee hours of the morning, unfortunately, and it does, you know, unfortunately affect their sleep patterns. And quite frankly, we're not too happy about that because we're early risers, and myself personally. So the other thing I want to just briefly mention is the fact that we are in an R5A. Pond Road is a R5A agricultural district. Okay, and last meeting we were here, it was stated by the board that any type of business activity like that has to be in the confines of a business district. This is outside the parameters. So in other words, it doesn't follow through, it doesn't meet the criteria that was mentioned back at our last meeting last fall, I believe it was. So just wanted to make sure that that's in. And again, we have been there for several times. We walked past 383 on occasion, up into the park and back and forth. Like Liv mentioned, we do that too. And I have not yet, the owners of that property, nor have they come down to greet us to introduce themselves. So just for, thank you.
Any prior meeting about this wasn't this board, it would have been a different board. I know the planning board saw this years back.
Finding, yeah.
It was in this room.
It was in
Different people, that's all.
yeah, I don't want to say last October, but I believe it might have been the planning. Perhaps.
Yeah, Gary lives by, I'm on Summer Road, don't live near.
Gary, what house number on 7?
21 Summer. It's, but I had a couple questions more to the actual reason I think we're here rather than trying to hear a personal story. It's maybe the owner of the property can give a breakdown of how long they spend in each of their other properties. And that to me would be, I mean, you're not going to Florida, Canada, overseas, like just driving. You can check your travel records if you're flying. If you're rich enough to have a private plane, you gotta file your flight plans. But they should be able to break down, I think, where they spend their time in different areas. And I always thought the primary residence, in order to have residents within it, dealing with people who used to say, well, I'm a resident of Florida, but I live in New York, but I spend all my time, so I don't want to pay New York taxes. And I thought they had to be there more than half the time, but I don't know that for a fact. The other is, the second question or comment that I would have is the thing says majority of the residing time would not be just during the application process. It should be, I would assume, in perpetuity, as long as you own it and you want to rent it as a bed and breakfast or anything else, it should be. It's not that I spent the last 3 months, but I'm never coming back again as soon as I get my bed or get my zone or whatever it is. Seems as though that should be, right now it appears to be a part of the ordinance or whatever, that you have to be, it has to be a resident there, the owner resident has to be there, not just now because I'm applying. And it would, if owner occupied, it would seem that it would indicate that the owner is there during the time the renters of the property are there too, because it just seems logical that the owner would be there. And the owner would want to be there really to protect their property, because you have itinerant people coming in. I want to make sure that my property is protected. And the last thing, and then I'll sit down, is that the attorney or whoever was speaking, asked why was the town board, what was their idea of doing it? I can't speak for the town board, but I believe that the reason would be that they're trying to maintain the rural character of the town. And that's why these rules are put in. They don't always do what I want, but it's a thing that the town probably, and again, the board would have to speak for themselves, is to, they want to maintain the rural character of the town. People come, people move down from Pittsburgh, they move down from Brighton, they move down here. And I think that they should be the last person to move into Mendon. Because I don't want any more people coming from Pittsburgh, because it's gonna change the rural aspect of the town. But that's, I believe that's why they did it. Okay? And if they wanted it zoned into a business, then they could go through the process and change it to a business district. But right now, we have, unfortunately, some of the stuff. And my personal opinion, and I have no reason to disbelieve myself. It seems like sometimes people just want to game the system. And that's my final comment.
So lastly, to David's point, so we have a Honeywood Falls high school graduate. And of course, the past few weeks, there have been multiple graduation parties. 2 of them have been on Pond Road. So, because whatever there is, drinking, whatever you want to call it, we had to go pick up our son at 2 a.m., 1:30 a.m. on Pond Road. And on both those occasions, it is stark black, dark as night, turning onto Pond Road from West Bloomfield until you get to a certain point. And then, as David said, there's all of a sudden a bunch of activity, and then you pass that and you get to the 2 homes where the graduates are. And you can see that the Honeywood Falls graduate sign is out. We have one in our front yard. So that's not what David said. That's we've experienced that twice. Picking up our son from
And just to clarify, party at their address or on the road at a different address?
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Different
Party
addresses.
was at their address or different address?
Different address, but
But you drove by that.
between where David is and the lot that we own, so you have to drive past that once you turn on Road up to West Bloomfield. So it is literally, I mean, just completely dark. You know, it's 2:30 in the morning. I'm trying to find the location where my son is. I know about where it is because each graduate has a Honeywood Falls sign. But once you get past our house to there, then it's a little bit more lit up, like David said, because there's whatever going on. And that happened both times on pickup.
Both meetings started at 7:30, so I got here this late, but just a point of clarification.
Can I get your name and address?
James
please?
Buckles, 972.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, oh no, you're good.
So, I don't know what the purpose of this board is, but are you responsible for the zoning laws that were established in the community?
Town board makes this up.
And what do you all do?
We.
Today, today we are hearing the appeal of a determination by the code enforcement officer and interpreting the zoning code.
So
What's the reason for the appeal?
So the reason for the appeal is we don't have terms that are going to be defined within our code. And agreements that we have a comprehensive plan for this town that does, its second point, try to preserve the rural agricultural demographic in this community. But tonight, we're just here to give an interpretation of 2 terms.
Right now, she applied for a special use permit to operate a tourist home with bed and breakfast. The code enforcement officer told them that they could not do that and would not give the application to the planning. They are appealing from the denial of their application going to the planning board. We have to decide if his decision was correct, and we also have to decide what it means to say that your house is owner occupied such that it's your primary residence.
Owner occupied, does the number of guests matter?
Owner occupied as far as within Monroe County's viewpoint is that there's somebody that's living within the home itself. There's no more than 4 rooms for rent within that particular house, but it's that each room is individual.
Because if you simply look at the Airbnb, right, there is an area, I don't know if it's an attic or an upstairs location, there's at least 10 beds there. Then are you nitpicking, does it have to be 4 to 5 bedrooms or?
It's more along the lines of the way the county uses it is with Airbnb or through VRBO or any of those online booking agencies, you're booking the entire house at once. You're not booking a separate room within one.
Zoning code, it says 4 lodging rooms. I see nothing talking about the number of people in these rooms. So it could be 1, could be 100, whatever. Code is not explicit, such number of people.
So you can get away with it if you've got 10 beds in number. Which is
Well,
exactly
that
what-
issue is also before the planning board, that's
Separate issue, but
that's not for us, that issue is a valid question, but that's not what's relevant.
I would just say I've owned that lot for 1 month and I've already met Dave and Cindy. I stopped down last weekend and introduced myself because I will be building a house there eventually. And to their point is, I plan to be a resident at that 373.
think I see a handle on that.
I'm Debbie Boyd, 151 Pine Road. We're down on the other end of it. I guess I'm just concerned with, to me, primary residence means where you spend the most time, not equal amounts of time. And I know we have 5 homes, but where you spend the most time is primary, right? That's what my concern is.
Doug Lloyd, 151 Pine. If the application was denied and activity still kept going on after it was denied, hasn't a precedent been set of how things are going to be looked at going forward? Right, I mean, so if it's denied, to me, that meant, okay, we stop. And then we go forward, right? And then you go through this process. Well, we didn't stop, and now we're still going through the process, so to me, it's been set.
And
Our code enforcement officer applied fines to them that have yet to go through the legal process within this township. They have been on hold for 6 to 8 months, roughly. And that's for a myriad of factors that you could ask the planning board if and when this should go there.
So whether fines have been made or not, it was still denied. And it was still,
It was an illegal operation.
it still went on without any,
We should have, as the township pursued an injunction against it.
Right.
Would have been the correct legal recourse.
That falls
That's
out.
not for us.
no, I understood it, and just making my comment. It just kind of, to me, it just lends itself to the thought in the future, yeah, going forward.
So I'm just completely confused because there's what is in the application and there's what we all know when we're having a discussion, right? My understanding is they live in New York City, right? And they rent an Airbnb. It's fine, rent your Airbnb every week. Am I thrilled about it? Not really. But our point is, don't expand it into family reunions and company business. I want to rent it to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. I'm thrilled about it? Not really. When we start expanding it into, and then, we've heard things about, just remember, we're local, we've been local, we've raised our kids here. We would have never bought the lot. Now we're hearing things about winery, all different types of things. And
Where's it at?
exactly, and that would have certainly changed our, so now we're sitting here at our house talking about, should we sell a lot?
Dennis Cable, 1190 Men's Center Road.
These fines that you speak of that you're experiencing as months pass by, is there a round number we would expect to see that fine accumulate to?
That has not been disclosed to us.
That's, somebody that owns 5 properties, I don't think the fines should be.
Well, and when they're charging 1,100 a night, what's the matter?
Well, Mr. Buckles? Yeah. Not to discourage your not seeing neighbors, do you know me, sir? No, I've been on the Mendon Center for 3 generations. 3 generations of Mendon Center just below you. So not seeing someone or seeing someone, I don't think that really justifies resident or not.
Yeah.
Because we live right down the road for all that. But yeah.
We've owned a property in Florida for 25 years, does that make us residents?
I keep going back to the law. I hear people say fines, I hear people say it's illegal. Yet, we're talking about it. So it seems to me we're at the wrong meeting. We ought to be influencing people to make a decision. That's not you guys.
What the,
So, you're just here to hear us. And you're gonna interpret what we say. I'd rather ask the people to make the law. What does the law say? Because if they have a variance, I'd like to get a variance. Right, because I have 7 acres, but now I can only have 1 house on it. Because they changed the law without me, they just changed the law.
So that's a perfect example of why it would exist though. So if you did want to pursue a second home on that 7 acres, you would have to pursue a variance, right? We're the board that you would present that.
Okay.
And we could then grant that or within working within that code with special exemptions.
But that's not tonight.
By the way, I like to.
Any other comments? Any in the back there?
I'm Cheryl Thompson, I live at 831 West Bloomfield Road, Jason Cultures. We've been there 31 years in that house, we put significant time and effort into the home, as a historic home. It is zoned residential and it is zoned agricultural, I have horses. I do not want a business in my neighborhood. And Airbnb that has more than a few people or 3 or 4 bedrooms is a business and that's not zoned for a business. This is a rural community. We're here because we don't want to live in a city and we don't want to live in a tract and we don't want to be listening to music and partying. However, if my neighbors party, I welcome it. They welcome when I party because I'm part of this community and we tolerate and love and care about each other and respect each other. And people that are coming and going that are not part of our community, in my opinion, are not welcome.
Is there some type of ordinance or something that, because you're looking at least 10 beds?
What you could do is you could yourself as just a general resident of anywhere in this country, you can contact the Department of Health and potentially make them aware of all those things. And that might be something that they would then pursue against them as far as events and those.
That's the outside ones.
Right.
We work with what abilities we're giving with these meetings.
Ron Zosky, 20 Stony Ridge. I was just curious, is a sign out in front of the house for a zoning change? Is that?
If the sign in front of the house is probably there for this meeting.
So this, okay, yeah, I was just curious.
Sorry.
I was just curious what the intent was.
Dennis Gable again, 1190 Mendon Center. The apple farm orchard, I welcome it. They'll get the deer out of my hair.
Debbie Gable, 1190 Mendon Center Road. In the past few months, we have seen an increase in traffic. And as Dennis says, he's 3 generations. When I came out here at 16 years old, this was the country. This now, you can't go by our house, pull out of our driveway with the increase in traffic. And their property probably runs behind where we are. There has been an increase in fireworks, which great if you want to do fireworks, but horses and dogs, I've got dogs and I've got one that's petrified of them, and I think it's the noise, the traffic, and I like the quietness of the country. And I don't see that anymore.
Any other comments?
Brett Pilcher from 495, 361. My understanding is there have been two, maybe this was already mentioned and I missed it, there were two cease and desist orders from the town that have been ignored. And I think if that's sort of a pattern of behavior, I think that's unsettling.
Any other comments? So with that, unless you see any objection from legal reasons, motion is. Oh, and Katrina, anyone online want to comment?
No.
I have a comment, question.
So your client's Airbnb profile is Monica is proposed. If I see that, sorry, your client's Airbnb listing, I believe, shows that Monica is the host of the property. So that listing, who's Monica?
That, she's the business manager.
The property owner?
The property manager.
And again, if you see anything blocked out, it's not because it's booked from here on out, it's because they blocked it out, so it will not get booked. And I'll make, one other comment, there are a couple weekends in April and May where it was rented, but it hasn't been in the recent past. So some of the comments about parties or goings on, we frankly are scratching our heads about as we sit at this table. Perhaps they were a family party that we mentioned before.
We have cameras throughout the entire property, coming in and out, all throughout the property. So my phone will go off, my caretaker's phone will go off, my business manager's phone will go off, if activity is at night. And our phone's gonna go off.
And again, the reason why we are here is to get an application in front of the planning board so that there can be a legally run bed and breakfast / tourist home business that's allowed in that zone or your code.
What's your point? Is your camera going off or your
You
phone's
can't
going
touch
off?
it. Sorry.
Press the board.
So.
I'm at 6 Prairie Hill Lane. And it's off Smith Road, which runs perpendicular to Pond Road.
What's your name?
Kelly Farming.
Kelly, I'm sorry, what was the house number? I'm sorry.
6.
6, gotcha. Thank you.
So my question is kind of inspired by other comments. As somebody who is moving into a new community, purchasing property, sort of how they venture into that new community and how they treat it and their intentions. And so if we look at how one person is like, okay, I'm planning to settle down here, and I'd like to meet my neighbors, have friendly relationships with them. If I have an emergency, then maybe they want to help me, different things like that, versus I have no intention of being here, I'll do what I want and disregard things. And I think you can see, aside from words, a lot from actual actions, what the intention is there in terms of residency and primary, secondary, third, whatever. Maybe she doesn't even have a primary residence, but it doesn't really seem like intention behind actions towards the rest of the community include that this would be that primary residence. That's all. Just going on for the same comments, like how one perceives.
You ready with it?
She's ready.
My name is Brad Prentice. I'm at 28 Park Manor Circle. And the comment I want to make is just that a lot of things I've heard said here tonight are about the process, and this is a small piece of the process. So maybe a lot of the comments said tonight aren't really appropriate for this venue and this particular. My question is, can you walk us through what the process is? But before it starts, we would know when the right hearing is for these kinds of comments.
In a general sense, you're either gonna get the interpretation is favorable or not. If it's not, then as far as this is done, we're done. Maybe they pursue legal action, who knows where that goes. If they get a favorable interpretation, they're on to the planning board, which also means, and this is the application, probably in the next month or so, depending on scheduling. The planning board will go through the special use permit, just like tonight, have a time to comment. They would be either favorable or not outcome of that. Again, if they're out, they're done. If it's favorable, they could go on and do what they're asking for.
There's two parts to this determination. One is whether they get to go to the planning board, the other is what primary residence and owner occupied. So if we say they can go to the planning board, we also have the responsibility to interpret the code in regards to what the planning board should apply when you consider the application.
So if you don't move it to the planning board, does it end today?
Pending appeal.
It's just, what it would do is like potentially put us to the point, interpretation. Certain reality is our code says something different. County.
Litigation can always come into change. We work with what we have. If you're ever curious about when the meeting is happening, the town's website does have a calendar of what's happening. Reasonable.
Typically, an application for a special use permit is presented to the planning board without teacher's appearance. And so if we decide that this application goes before the planning board, it's not some kind of determination about the merit of the application. The planning board considers that. We consider whether the application should go to the planning board, and if it does, what primary residence is expected to consider.
Hi, I'm Brent Van Auken. I'm at 145 Pond Road. And I've just got a question about there's got to be an exact definition of what a primary residence is in New York State and Monroe County. And the reason I'm asking the question is kind of odd that you're going to interpret it. I have so many friends that are snowbirds that live in Rochester and Florida, and they all spend 6 months and 1 day in Florida, so they don't have to pay property taxes in New York State. That was always my understanding, is if you spend more time in one place than another, that's your primary residence, but maybe that's wrong. But I have a friend, for instance, that just moved to Miami, but he also comes back to Rochester, and he keeps careful track of his time. He said, Brad, I'd love to come back here, but I gotta make sure I don't come back here too often, or else I lose my residency in Florida. So I'm just wondering, what's the definition? There must be a specific definition.
So when the zoning code is written, there are definitions for a whole bunch of things. If it ever becomes into question what something means, it comes to the zoning board for interpretation, or the town board amends the code. So that's why we're here. Any other comments?
We might answer your question.
I'm not seeing any other hands. So with that, anyone on the board like to move before the public hearing? That was a public hearing.
Chris, you good for a second? Second.
All right.
Yeah, if you want the, give the applicant the comment, find to submit anything else they want to submit for us. We close public hearing down, give them 2 additional weeks or something like that. So
I would ask them, would you like to submit anything else? So you need on whatever.
To be clear, are you giving us the opportunity to submit additional information as toward the issues we're discussing?
Information document.
If you like, ask the question, yes, if you like, yes, please.
yeah, based on what you've heard tonight.
Yes, we would like a chance to respond.
Can we ask for input from the town board and the code enforcement officer?
Yes, we can close the public hearing process, but we can leave the record open for 2 weeks, let anybody in the public submit anything else that they want to submit for consideration. Just not allowed for the public. close the public hearing tonight, then that will obviously start the clock for our time to render a decision. Which is 2 days.
So assuming you have the voting closed now, give them 2 weeks to add whatever information you want, we see them in our next meeting, do you think that clock works, or should we delay closing?
Well, that's the other thing, is you could just keep the public hearings open, keep it as a matter of open, table for the discussion until everybody has had a chance to provide any additional input. And then at the next meeting, have a, hopefully, the session, the continuation, close it then, and continue the deliberations. And then, so the clock did that, the clock will start running. So that would be obviously next year.
So you said we would like more time.
We would like to take up your offer for submitting additional information. You can submit it within 2 weeks of tonight for your consideration.
August 11th will be your next
August
meeting.
11th.
And that would be the meeting time here, the sooner we get the information, the sooner we do it.
I'm sorry, I'm totally.
August 11th will be the time we will hear, the sooner you can get whatever information to us, the easier, the more time we have to.
Is that, so do you have a meeting tonight, August 11th?
Yes.
Our cutoff point for anybody else with a new application was July 7th. This is not a new application, so you can come back in 2 weeks if you would like.
Good.
Are you keeping the public hearing open?
I don't believe we have voted, so we have a motion in a second, and now we'll discuss. Right.
Okay.
Procedurally.
Okay.
I am fine closing the public hearing and just taking any additional information together 2 weeks and count, starting with 62 today. Anybody else thoughts on that?
I feel like we can handle this responsibility.
So in that case, I believe we have a motion in a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and the public hearing is closed. If you have feedback you want to us before the August 11th meeting, so we will then take that into consideration and most likely make a decision that night. Possibly it'll get bumped out to the next meeting in 2 weeks, depending on how details play out. Does that sound about right? All right.
I just like to put on the record that I would like, if the code enforcement officer and the town board are willing, I would like to know from the code enforcement officer what authority there is to withhold the application from the planning board. And from the town board, anybody who's from the town board, I'd be interested to know the intent of the amendment to the specific part of the code. Those are the things that I would be interested in hearing about
Okay.
within the.
Corey wrote a letter to you that's in your
I know,
file.
I've read it.
Okay,
Doesn't
you
answer.
want more, okay. Can you email me that, Stephen, so I can think of?
Yep.
So with that, I believe that.
May I ask you a question? Katrina just mentioned a letter from the code enforcement officer. Is that different from the letter of denial that is we're aware of in the record, or is this different?
It was a communication to the zoning board. It was how would we phrase this?
It's just a memo, it's part of the record, if you wanted that copy of that.
I would request we have a copy of that so we can review it as part of, and perhaps respond to it. Sure. As part of the August 11th.
And we should just also note for the record that we did receive additional correspondence from some community members. I don't have to look at everything, but Katrina, if you want to identify what those are, like who we got them from.
There was one from Andy Conroy, and Dr. Pilcher sent me the talking points that he addressed this evening. So just Andy Conroy's email directed to you because he's out of town. He was on Zoom but had to.
So we can make those available.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
People should understand that there's commissions like that, emails from the community or the appellant themselves, they are all their public records, so people have the opportunity if they wish to sustain them, so they're not, these aren't like secret files and that.
So for the next 2 weeks, you can flood Katrina with emails.
Awesome, thank you.
You got that.
With that, I believe that's the discussion on the majority interpretation for the moment, which would leave us at the approval of the minutes of the next agenda.
Yes.
We're not going to do anything else.
You guys don't want to discuss my.
Can I ask you guys to hold off on anything you're going to discuss for the
Fine job, by the way, and I'm very proud of my neighbors also for being great. I'm gonna send you out.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I'm very interested in my question. Listen to Juan for all these kinds of questions. I mean, a lot of good points.
Right,
But there is-
and that we can't, if it goes to, there's always public comment meetings, but, if you, and then if they come to the planning board, it'd be the same thing, that's public hearing. That's great.
Okay.
Okay, I have one. Everybody, if you don't mind, the meeting is still going on, it's on business to do, so you can talk out the parking lot all night, I don't care, but I need to go. Get out. Exactly. Oh, I told you that, yes, we got the site plan, so you can get it over to everybody. Oh, no. I love, yes, yes, you're up. You're not 10 our youngest is just.
We can consider it from the discussion from your code.
All right, so you've got Thank you. Is that, and I knew you'd say something. I'm married, 16 years this summer. What's your husband? He's a financial controller at St. Anne's Community. Oh, so that's RGH. Well, no, it's, okay. Please, okay, oh wait, Max, I'm approving my minutes, thank you, who's got my second?
I'll second it.
All right, Dustin, yeah, hold on one second, we're gonna finish this. All in favor of my minutes?
First page, I want to change first.
Come on,
First
Danny.
page, kind of 4 lines up from the bottom, Mr. Bash, 5 feet from the house, not property line. Would that one change? So you need to address that.
Hold on, one second. What page? You want me to say house and or
5
property
feet
line?
from the house rather than property line. Because that's what I intended, and I listened to the recording, it wasn't clear what I actually said right there.
You don't want to err on what I wrote instead. That's fine, Danny, I'll do it as amended, I will clarify.
We noted it, we noted it.
Yeah, it's going to be amended.
No, I didn't. Okay, all in favor?
As amended, thank
As
you.
amended, yeah. Any opposed? All right, then that passes.
So you guys will be here in 2 weeks, I will be dealing with
Will we be
influx of
here?
emails. Do you want to
We
adjourn?
have to come back in 2 weeks.
Yes, Stanley, yeah.
But wait, do we have to come back?
Yes, they are intending to come on the 11th. No,
We closed the public hearing and we told them they could submit things.
they are gonna come back. You have people on your agenda. There's always public comment. That's what they wanna, that's what I understood.
I'm not sure.
Because they need, you have not determined anything. They
That's
need, we have to finish this meeting. Or this application, I should say.
But it doesn't have to happen next meeting necessarily.
Well, that's what they would like to do. That's what you had offered was the next meeting 2 weeks.
Michelle.
Because you closed the public hearing. You are on a TikTok time.
Oh, I know. But what we said is they have a deadline to submit something. We didn't say we were gonna be back here to listen to them.
Well, that's what we said. I said it'd be August 11th, the next meeting.
That's what the deadline is for them to
Do you
submit.
prefer to not meet the 11th, and meet the 25th or whatever?
Well, I don't know, I'm just saying, we don't necessarily have to.
Stephen.
Okay, people, can we, do you want to adjourn and then figure out what you want to
It's just
do?
that We're gonna get the submissions by August 11th.
I agree that
If we get stuff at 4 o'clock on the 11th.
No, I will email them tomorrow and explain, if they want to be here on the 11th, it's got to be in a week prior. So they have 1 week to get it. If not, they are bumped to the 25th. Is that okay with you?
Does that work for you?
Yeah, no, no one's allowed to come with stuff that night.
I think my only point is that we're not gonna hear from anybody.
on the 11th.
You always have public comment on your agenda, so anybody can speak about anything, but you've just got to keep them in mind. They can come to you with whatever they want to say.
That's not
It's
part
not a public hearing, it's not part of the application, but you always have public comment.
Maybe part of the record deliberation.
So if they give us something in the next week, we'll be here on the 11th. If they don't, it's the 25th.
Yeah. I would like to wait longer, because I'm never gonna get these minutes done in 2 weeks at this point. So
Well, we can delete the minute approval.
that would be lovely.
As a separate.
But then I gotta do double minute. It's fine. Do you want to adjourn so I can turn this off?
Is there anything else we should discuss, or are we done for the night?
David, is there any, as far as the.
Thank you.
So,
That's the very first week of August.
before we do that.
Yeah.
I understand we have the options of going in an attorney-client privilege.
Anytime.
Right.
Yeah.
But now, generally, everyone's not. Please take it back. But I think to the extent possible, we should let the public hear what we're saying. Whatever we're talking about. So, I mean, if you think there's a need to go to attorney-client privilege, we can do that. But if we want to talk about what we're considering doing with this case or whatever, I think it's ideal to leave it open. Otherwise, we're done with that discussion.
I think that if you're gonna talk about deliberating on what we heard tonight, that should be on the public, that should be on the record. For the public. I would suggest that it happen at the next meeting. Whenever we have this on for the next, because we've already encouraged people to leave, and they've left, so now they, wouldn't have benefit here, so I would encourage you to hold off on talking about it until you probably notice at the next meeting, that they kind of, they want to come watch you pass on.
Then that sounds good. In that case.
Okay, next. Who was second? Justin, man, you were getting.
No, that was Mr. Chris.
I know, but I'm just saying, you are always my second. Thank you, Mr. Mahood. 8:21, please hold. You are not off yet.